I have had a brief look at some of the things that you would like repatriated. You offer a series of options, green, amber and red. But actually, the red options are really, they would have to be withdrawal of the EU entirely. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree, actually. And you're right, this is a green paper. It's a series of options. It's a 250-page document. There's a lot of different proposals in there. And what we're saying, this is setting out, if you like, a menu of alternatives. Some of them the government could do without any renegotiation with the EU, and those are the ones we call the green options. Some of them would require some renegotiation with the EU. And the red options are areas where Britain could, if it wanted to take unilateral action. It wouldn't necessarily mean leaving the EU.
Wouldn't it?
You are right, no, it wouldn't. It would technically put us in breach of some of the EU treaties.
But that in it, I mean, technically,
no, but that in itself,
that
in itself would become the catalyst for renegotiation. Because at some point we have to cut this Gordian knot where people say, you know, it's impossible to renegotiate with the EU, they won't negotiate, and what if they say no, you're stuck where you are? The answer to that's not to say, therefore, we will leave and give up. The answer is to say, in which case, we will take action through Parliament to unilaterally set aside the authority of the ECJ in certain areas. That will then become a catalyst to bring them to the table and to encourage them to negotiate. And that's the kind of thing we shouldn't rule out. I don't want us to end there, and I actually think there's a lot of potential for us to make many changes before we even get there.
So can I just clarify that some of the things, for example, like withdrawing from the common fisheries policy, is that an end in itself, or is that a negotiating tool to get a whole menu of things that you have set out, but stopping short of withdrawing from the European Union?
Well, I think the common fisheries policy is a good example where the government, through negotiation, has actually made some very sterling progress in the last 9 months. Richard Benyon has done a fantastic job here. And we're actually, if the Commission put through what's currently proposed and the Member States support it, we're actually going to have a repatriation of common fisheries policy in all but name, in that you'll have groups of national governments taking their own decisions here.
But what makes you think you're going to get what you want? You say it's very easy to negotiate. I mean, if it had been that easy, one presumes these things would have been done by now. I mean, isn't it the case that Britain doesn't have partners with whom it can negotiate with in the EU because of what's gone on over the last year or so? They will just say no. No,
what the case is that no one's actually tried to renegotiate yet. We've not had a government previously...
So the government's failed to live up to its
promise. Not this
promise.
government, but in the last 10 years, we've had a Labour government that's wanted to continue to hand powers over.
I mean, I agree with what George is saying, but I think there's one very important thing, that our relationship with the European Union is changing. And the nature of the Eurozone is changing, and the Eurozone is becoming much more integrated and will become more so. And those changes require Britain's agreement. Now, we've got to wait, in my opinion, until those come forward. But when that happens, we have a chance to say we want a different relationship with Europe, because that relationship is going to be different.
Because we're going to have this sort of two-tier, even more of a two-tier.
Absolutely.
But that means waiting. How long do you think?
Well,
would you
I think
say
you've
to
got
George
to be.
Eustace that you have to wait?
I think it would be wise to wait before doing most of the things that George is suggesting. This will happen in time, but I think it's why the Prime Minister is right that the idea of a referendum now would be completely wrong. But I think a referendum in which there were 3 options in a few years' time would be the right course.
Are you prepared to wait?
Absolutely, I'm prepared to wait.
So no referendum now?
No, I think a referendum should come at the end of the process, not the beginning. And I think there are things we could do short-term, such as abandoning some of the Justice and Home Affairs. We've got an opt-out in June 2014. There are certain things we could do right now, but I accept that a lot of things we'll need to get in our manifesto and do a more fundamental renegotiation after the next general election.
I mean, to some extent, you know, they're taking over your territory here. I mean, if they're promising not just Tory MPs who are part of this group, but also the government, we're going to renegotiate, we're going to repatriate powers, at the end of which there may be the prospect of a referendum. What's UKIP got to offer?
Well, the polls are saying quite clearly that people want a yes or no. It's as simple as that. But the point I'd like to make on this is that many of the terms or many of the things you want to repatriate or renegotiate would require unanimity, and therefore you've got to get 26 other member states to agree to them. And actually it's just cloud cuckoo land, and at best I think that this is a bit of a smokescreen. At worst I think you're probably colluding with number 10, because this is a set-up job to try to kick this into the long grass and maybe throw a bit of meat to the Tory grassroots who are coming over to UK.
You're living in cloud cuckoo land, George Eustace.
No, I think that's nonsense, and I just reject this defeatist idea that it's impossible
to
renegotiate.
But how do you get over unanimity?
The point is that even if you left, people sometimes say, well, we should be like Norway or like Switzerland. Even if you left the EU, you would have to get what Norway's got, you'd have to renegotiate some kind of re-entry to that single market. And Norway accepts 75% of all the laws that come from the EU, but has no say in their formulation. So we might as well negotiate from within the EU as negotiate from outside.
They also need unanimity in order to get the closer fiscal union, for us to agree to
yes.
that.
Yes. So Norman Lamont is saying we have a stick with which to threaten the EU in terms of getting what Britain would like in the way you have said.
But to renegotiate, it says quite clearly, and I've got it in front of me here, Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty says renegotiation can only happen after we hand in terms of withdrawal. So you're doing it the wrong way round. It should be a yes or no referendum. If we vote to come out, then you start the negotiation, not the other way round.
Right.
I mean, I think it's absolute cloud cuckoo land at the moment to think that Britain's got an a la carte menu called the European Union, and we can pick and choose that. And the unanimity rule and other rules will stop that process. And by the way, any negotiation in Europe is a two-way process. I mean, when Ted Heath joined the European Union, or as it differently called then, but when he did that, fisheries was something he gave away for New Zealand.
When we joined the EEC back in 72, and we had the referendum in 75, it made up for 30% of the globe's trade. It's now 15% and shrinking. The Anglosphere makes up for around 35 to 40% at the moment. We should be tying ourselves to the Anglosphere, not the slowest growing economic bloc on the planet, which is the European Union.
We're saying that once they come up with proposals for a fiscal union, if they're able to do that, which will be several years away, that is the point at which you would put your demands on the table.
But we waited 37 years already. If you're under 54, you've never had a vote on this. I wasn't born last time round. And don't forget, what we voted for in 75 was about trade. What it's gone into now, or what it's turned into, is actually the embryo of a European superstate. And it's something we shouldn't be part of.